Without further ado, please welcome both Mary Beth Tinker and John Tinker. Yeah, you can share the microphone.
We are going to share something. We can't do this. Yes, we can. It's not like when you used to take my toys all the time. Yeah. Go ahead, admit it.
That is not true.
Oh, right. Well, we had a nice discussion now, just with Professor Allison, about the beginnings of the First Amendment and how it was interpreted, and no one knew exactly. I mean, people had different opinions about it, right? Where the limit was, and this has been going on for many, many years. And so we'll just take that from the early 1900s, around the time of World War I, when you could be imprisoned, and many people were, like Eugene Debs and others, for daring to speak out against war. And around this time, as I said earlier, was when the American Civil Liberties Union was created to speak up for civil liberties and for the rights of the public to have free speech and a free press, and we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the American Civil Liberties Union. Now, the American Civil Liberties Union was kind of important in our lives, right, John?
Yes, ma'am.
I knew you were going to say that. And it was kind of important in the life of Kathy Kuhlmeyer from the Hazelwood case. And it was also important in the only other two cases that went to the Supreme Court on student speech rights, which were the, I know you know them, the Frazier, Bethel versus Frazier. Y'all heard of this case? We can review that one. I know you'll get into that one. Or this little bad boy teenager. Well, he spoke with a lot of sexual innuendos. It was in 1986, Bethel versus Frazier. At a big auditorium full of students, he gave a speech for his friend who was running for student body president. I think it was the body part that really got him going. So anyway, he gave this speech with all these sexual innuendos, and the court ruled against him. That was 86. That was an ACLU case. And then the other one was recently, 2007. The infamous, who knows that one?
Bong Hits for Jesus.
Bong Hits for Jesus. Yeah, that's its nickname, right? Morris versus Frederick. The Bong Hits for Jesus case. Everyone know that one? You can see the Bong Hits for Jesus banner at the museum in Washington, D.C. If you want to go there to their First Amendment student rights, display there at the museum. So anyway, all four of those cases at the Supreme Court on student speech rights were ACLU cases. And ACLU lawyers argued those cases. And so we jump from 1917 up to the 1960s. And the ACLU came to help John and I and so many of us students who are speaking up for our rights. So what should we do, John? Maybe you say a few words and then we should open it up. Maybe we should just make this informal and kind of open it up for discussion, more questions. You can take over. You are older and wiser.
Just rub it in. Go ahead. Well, I would like to talk a little bit about, people ask us, has our case been diminished over the years? And I don't want to get into an argument with David Hudson over this because he will win. But I just want to give my own impressions on that thought. And when we were wearing the armbands, our motives were not to stress the principle of freedom of speech or to exhibit it or to prove where a limit was or anything like that at all. We were interested in promoting our view against the war in Vietnam, and we used the First Amendment as a tool. We didn't exactly know that we were confronting the First Amendment or that we were dealing with the First Amendment. We weren't self-consciously aware of that. We were aware that other students wore religious symbols to school, political buttons and things like that. And in the public school system in Iowa at the time, we grew up with this idea I may disagree with what you say, but I'll support with my life, you know, your right to say it. And so every school kid basically in Des Moines that I was aware of understood and could spout that basic principle. And so when we designed our protest, we designed it to not confront any other principle if we could. We actually dressed nicely. I wore a suit coat for the first time in my life.
You wore a tie. Didn't you
I
wear
had a tie and a white shirt. We had a silent symbol. It was just symbolic. It wasn't in your face. We weren't standing up to make noise or anything like that. And so, and also we were opposed to the war in Vietnam, which is clearly a political, clearly political speech. And so the subsequent cases didn't really fall along those lines. The Frazier case, starting with Matt Frazier, he was using sexual innuendo. It wasn't a political thought. It wasn't political speech. And so you're bumping into other directions where the speech is actually doing something else. And it was humor, but it was sexual humor among high school kids. So it's like I could see the point of the court in his case. Matt told me once, he said, hey, you were making a point and I was just telling dirty jokes, which really was true. The Frederick case, the Morse v. Frederick case with the bong hits for Jesus, I had the opportunity to discuss student rights once with Kenneth Starr, who on the radio, who argued that case for the school board. And Kenneth Starr said, you know, I really agree with your case. I think it's important that your case remain the standard. But we were just carving out a little narrow piece for promotion of illegal drug use. And so my view on the has Tinker v. Des Moines been diminished is that my metaphor is like those mesas that you see out west, and sort of the sides have eroded off, but the actual height hasn't been diminished. And I think the court has been pretty clearly supportive of the non-disruptive expression of political speech. So that's really the only point I had to make, and I think it would be best if we just went right to questions. Any questions?
Let's just
Yes.
open it up. Also, I have to just add that I don't completely agree with that analysis. Because I do think that the rights of students have eroded quite a bit, and that even though the ruling in our case was very bland, neither students or teachers lose their right to freedom of expression at the schoolhouse gate, except students cannot substantially disrupt school and cannot impinge on the rights of others, whatever that means. And so that's been debated ever since. What does that mean? Does it mean if you wear an American flag shirt to school that you're disrupting or that you're impinging on the rights of others? Yes, courts have ruled that yes, as a matter of fact, that could impinge on the rights of others. So, I mean, there are all kinds of ways that this has been interpreted to suppress student speech. But anyway, and even from there, I think it's eroded quite a bit.
Also, obviously, the Hazelwood case did take away
very significant,
what many
yes.
people consider to be part of the set of rights that went with students. Everybody knew that the rights of students were not identical to the rights of adults, which is free speech, because adults can set up a soapbox and literally just start talking, and that would be disruptive of a school environment. So.
Yeah, so
Everyone knew that
Hazelwood,
they weren't the same set of rights, but when Hazelwood came along and they said, also you don't have the right to freedom of press if the school owns the newspaper, that really was took away from what people expected to get with our case.
Hazelwood was a sort of a tsunami against students' rights in 1988. And another major blow to student rights, I would have to say, was the Dariano case in California recently, where the students were wearing American flag shirts basically to mock the Mexican kids on Cinco de Mayo. But the core, basically, it has to do with the heckler's veto. The heckler's veto, maybe a lot of you know about the heckler's veto, I'm sure you do. But for adults, if you're being heckled, the heckler is the one that has to stop speaking, not the person who's speaking. If I go out and start speaking for peace or for Black Lives Matter or anything else, and I get hassled and heckled, we're supposed to stop the heckler, not the speaker, right? You all understand this basic concept, right? Well, in schools, that has just been completely undermined. So the heckler, the bully, gets the say now, pretty much, in schools. Because if you can show that the bully or the heckler is going to be, causing a disruption or causing some kind of commotion in school, you can shut down the speaker. And that's what the American flag shirt case basically decided.
Yeah.
So yes, let's open it up. Yes.
My students have a lot of questions about timeline. You got suspended on the day, on what date, and were you at...
Yeah, the timeline was really interesting, because when John says, that the thing was planned, this is the way we planned it, I actually didn't plan it. I was in 8th grade. I was 13 years old. John was 15 in 10th grade. And so there was a group over at Roosevelt High School, and John was at North High School, and some high school students really planned it. Bruce Clark, Ross Peterson, a few. So they were going to be wearing the armbands, and I heard about it after the rule against armbands came from the principals, because some of the leaders of it came over to our house to talk to our dad, because they knew him from the summer peace camp that my dad was involved with, and so they came over to ask my dad for advice and talk to him about it, what they should do. But so that was in December. We were supposed to wear the armbands December 16th. And about December 14th, it came out in the Des Moines Register that there would be a ban against armbands. Very catchy. And so that's when we found out that the principals had heard about the plan. Some kids wrote an article in the school newspaper, in the Roosevelt. They were going to write an article, but there was prior review, so they had to run it by the principal. So that's how the principals found out about our plan. And so they came out with a plan, a ban on armbands, which was clearly prior restraint, which is one of the reasons why we won the case. And so by December, and so then we had, this big moral dilemma. There were 50 kids signed up to wear armbands. And by December 16th, I think 3 or 4 students wore armbands. Well, if you count my little brother and sister, Paul and Hope, who were in 5th grade and 2nd grade, they wore black armbands that day too, but didn't get suspended. So anyway, about 5 kids, 15th and 16th. I wore an armband on the 15th, and I was so scared and nervous. I'll just tell you briefly what happened when I went to school. I didn't know, because we had been raised, in this household where people speak up and stand up. And we had also seen things like the Birmingham Children's Crusade on TV. In 1963, I was 10 years old, and we saw these kids, 2,000 children were arrested and, attacked with dogs and water hoses, and those were our examples. We thought they were so amazing, but I was very, very shy. I like to go roller skating and, study for a math class. But I finally decided, okay, I'll try to be brave. So I put on I had this armband and I had it on, and our dad was against it originally. He thought, well, maybe you shouldn't be doing it because it's against the rules. And so, we explained it. Well, Dad, look how you stand up for what you believe, and it's our conscience. And John will talk about that more too. But so I was going to wear my black armband. I went off to school, and I was really nervous and scared. And I got to school, and there I saw. Wait a second. I'm going to show you something. My favorite teacher, Mr. Moberly, standing in the hall with a pink slip. And I I took the pink slip. I was so scared and so nervous, and I went down to the office, and Mrs. Tarman, the girls' advisor, said, "Now sit down, Mary Beth. Now you know that's against the rules to wear that armband. So take off the armband right now." I looked at Mrs. Tarman and I looked around the office, and in a great stand of courage, I said, "Okay, Mrs. Tarman, here you go." And I took off that armband in about 2 seconds. Which is really funny because ever since then, people are like, "You were so brave. I admire your bravery so much." And I said, "Oh, yes, I was so brave." And I was feeling kind of proud of myself. I was thinking, well, at least, I did stand up for myself, and I made my point about peace. And well, we were wearing them because Robert Kennedy had proposed a truce in the war. So we thought that was a good idea. And we were mourning the dead in Vietnam. And so I took off that armband, I put it down, I was thinking, oh, okay, that's over. Well, as you can see, it wasn't over. And I went back to class, and then someone was sent to my class. A student came to the door of the class and said, "Mary Beth Tinker wanted in the office." So I went back to the office, and I was scared and nervous, and Mrs. Tarman said, oh, this is so funny. She gave me this suspension paper, my suspension paper. I tell the kids in the schools, always keep your suspension paper. You just never know when it might come in handy. I took this suspension paper, and she said, "You're going to be suspended anyway because you broke the rules." So I took the paper, and I walked home, and I was very nervous. I didn't know what to think or what would happen. But soon after that, the ACLU came in, and we also convinced our parents. Well, my mother didn't really need any convincing. She was already very strongly for peace. But through the years, people or the school board lawyers, they would say, "Well, your parents, they made you do that. They cut the cloth, I bet, and they put that armband on you. It was all your parents." But our parents didn't have to do any of that because we had already ingrained their values. We had already accepted their values. So yes, our parents did have a strong influence in it, but it was over the years before then. So that's what happened as far as the timeline, and I'll let John say his timeline about it.
Okay, yesterday I mentioned the March on Washington that I went on. Also Chris Eckhart, who was one of the plaintiffs. On the way back, we decided to wear armbands to continue to protest. So there were actually 4 of us on the bus that all belonged to a Unitarian youth group, the Liberal Religious Youth.
Catchy.
LRY, now they're YRUU, and anyway, that's aside from. Anyway, we took this idea of wearing the armbands to protest the war to the meeting of the youth group, and the kids were all in favor of it. So we did have a number of kids that had signed on to the idea of wearing armbands, and I believe December 16th was the target date. But the Friday previous, the school board principals had got wind of this through the newspaper article for the student newspaper that one of our members had written. And he got on the phone with the other principals in town, and they decided to ban the wearing of armbands. And we learned about this from the newspaper article. A day passed between that where we knew that there was going to be a problem, but we didn't have any meeting. And suddenly at the appointed hour where we were to wear the armbands, it occurred to me, based on some nonviolence training that I had participated in earlier related to the civil rights movement, that when you're going into a situation where there's going to be a confrontation, that your group should be together on what to expect and what to do. And I felt, we missed that step in the planning, so I got on the phone and tried to call people. Now, Mary Beth had gone to school very early, like around 7.
I had already left for school with my armband.
So we
all
were
this group unity and everything.
That's right. Anyway, school started at 7:15, and
I was on time.
at 8:15. I'm getting anyway, I'm a little embarrassed, honestly, about that, the way that
okay,
happened.
it's okay.
Okay, so as long as I'm embarrassed, it's all right, right? Okay. And so I called Chris Eckhart on the phone and said, I don't care, I'm going to wear it anyway. Okay. So I called Ross Peterson and Bruce Clark, and they said, okay, we'll wait. And so Chris and Mary Beth got suspended that first day, and we had a meeting then in the afternoon at Chris's house to decide what to do. And we decided to call the school board president and try to assure him that this was not going to be a disruptive thing. We're just wearing these black pieces of cloth.
Oh, by the way, excuse me, which people had done a couple years earlier to mourn the death of school spirit with no problem whatsoever.
That's true. So we called, and the secretary said the president of the school board is not going to speak with you. He said it's not important, and that if you have a problem, take it to the school board meeting, which was in January. Well, one of the reasons, we had two stated reasons for wearing the armbands, and one of them was to mourn the deaths on both sides of the conflict, which you can see a little controversy right there. And the other reason was in support of Robert Kennedy's call for a Christmas truce, because honestly, we were young and idealistic, and we thought if a Christmas truce were ever started, it might be difficult to return to warfare. So the Christmas occasion, now it's the seasons, but back then in Des Moines, Iowa, it was Christmas. And we thought that we'd lose that opportunity to have that part of the reason to wear the armbands. So we thought we can't really wait until January. And at that point, when the school board president said he didn't want to talk to us, then the rest of us decided to wear armbands. And so we did. And that morning, the next morning, I think it was the 17th of December, I had the armband in my, I was dressed nicely with a suit and tie, and I had the armband in my pocket because I was going to walk to school, and I didn't want, in my mind, I was imagining somebody throwing a beer can at me, honestly. I had had a beer can thrown at me before, full of beer, and hitchhiking, and somehow that image came to my mind, and I didn't want to have the armband on as I walked to school. So as I was leaving, our dad said, you know, John, I'm not so sure you should wear that armband. The school authorities have their job to do, and they've made a rule, and they think they're doing the right thing, and maybe you should obey that rule. And I said, well, Dad, this is just a black piece of cloth, and people in Vietnam are dying every day. And Dad said, so for you, it's a matter of conscience. And I said, I guess it is. And he said, well, then I support you. And our parents were both real believers in conscience, because they felt that conscience was the one missing ingredient in Germany that allowed what happened in Germany to happen. So this was not that, this was 20 years after the end of World War II, and they had both suffered a lot of moral anguish over what had happened during the war and post-war with the development of the bomb. And they felt that conscience was like a key ingredient in human society, and the respect for the individual conscience was very important. Anyway, Dad said, yeah, then I support you. So I walked to school. The first thing I had was a band. We met, or orchestra actually, we met before school in the morning, so I was also early to school, but not as early as you were. And I still didn't have the armband on. And by the time I got to school, it was like kind of embarrassing. Where do I put on the armband? You know, it's going to be. So I went to band without it. I went to homeroom. I don't do homeroom, the first place where they check the attendance and so on. And I still didn't have it on. So after homeroom, I went into the boys' bathroom and started trying to pin this on with a safety pin. And a guy from my homeroom came in and noticed me struggling, and he helped me pin it on. It was kind of sweet. And then I wore it on top of this dark suit coat all morning. And if the teachers noticed it, they didn't say anything about it. I had a distinct impression that my math teacher did see it, but that he disagreed with the school policy against them, and so he didn't mention anything about it. So my last class for the morning was gym, and as I was getting dressed again after the shower, after gym, I decided to put the armband on just over the white shirt and not with the suit coat, so it would be quite distinct and obvious. And so I went to the lunchroom like that and sat down at my usual table with my usual friends to have lunch. And some other kids came over and they said, commie, you yellow, coward, and that kind of really antagonistic, bugging me. And one of the football players came over, who I sort of knew a little, but not really, and he said, hey, you think you have your beliefs about the war, John has his beliefs about the war, John has a right to his beliefs, leave him alone. And this was a football player, so that was just really nice. But when I went to the first class in the afternoon after lunch, there was a phone call, send John Tinker to the office. So I went to the office and spoke with the principal. And Don Wetter was a really good guy in a lot of ways. And he sat me down and he said, John, I know you think you're doing the right thing, but maybe there's some things you don't understand. Maybe you don't understand the importance of supporting the government in times of war. Maybe you've been influenced by the wrong people. Maybe there have been some communists that have, suggested things to you that maybe you don't want to be doing this. And he was a veteran of the Korean War. So he brought a certain patriotism theme to the discussion, but he was respectful. And at the end of about 45 minutes, so you can imagine, there was a real conversation there. He said, okay, now I'm going to ask you to take off the armband, and if you do, you can go back to class, and that's the end of it. Nothing more will happen. But if you don't, then I'm going to have to send you home. I won't suspend you. There won't be any paperwork involved, but you'll have to go home, and you can't return with the armband on. He said, so I'm going to ask you to take the armband off, but I don't think you're going to take it off, are you? And later, when I looked back to that exact thing that he said, I realized that he was respecting my integrity and my own conscience. And in a sense, it was kind of a backward kind of support. And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, okay, let's call your dad and get you home. So anyway, that's how we got kicked out of school. Then when we were all kicked out over the holiday, when there was no school, we had a community meeting of the students that were suspended, the parents involved, and the other community members that were interested in the peace angle. We all met at the Friends Meeting House, the Quaker Meeting House in Des Moines, and tried to figure out how to proceed. And a phone call was made to a local law professor, and he recommended that he thought that we did have a case, that we had a First Amendment case, and he recommended that we go back to school without the armbands on so that we didn't have a truancy issue to complicate the case, and that we bring a suit. And so that's what we did.
Can I ask?
You have two questions.
Such silly questions. I have two silly questions about the dissent. So, first silly question. In the dissent, it says that very differently than your account, that your math class was wrecked.
Oh, I know, that
By
I
this
wrecked the
argument.
math class.
Yeah, did you wreck the math class?
No, not at all. In fact, I was a star pupil of the math class. No, I'm just kidding. But I loved math. And what happened was the day before, Mr. Moberly spent the whole class period talking about what would happen if any of us wore armbands. He spent a good part of the class. So that's actually what disturbed the math class, if anything. I said nothing. I just wore my little armband. I mean, first of all, I was the shyest person in the history of the world, so I wasn't the one to go disrupting math class at all.
My other question was, were you in the court when I don't know.
Yeah.
Were you in the court and did Justice Black give this dissent, and did it seem as disrespectful to you at the time as it read?
We didn't hear them give the decision. We did go to court. I was there. John missed the flight, which was another kind of sad story, but see, I was always on time, see? But regardless, so I was in court with my family. I was a junior in high school. And, but it's funny, I barely remember being there. Now I've become kind of a court groupie because I live in DC and I love to go over there and see what's going on, the rallies and things. But at the time, I barely remember what happened because I had moved to a whole new city that November of junior year. So imagine, teenagers, imagine like you're plopped down into a whole new city, a whole new school, a big city, St. Louis, come on, this is the big time. So I was in St. Louis in November, and I was dealing with all these adolescent issues like, who am I going to speak to in algebra class, and where am I going to have lunch, and, I was really shy. So and then they're like, oh, it's time to go to the Supreme Court now next week. We're going to go to the Supreme Court. So I went, but I barely remember it. I think it's, sort of says something about how your brain works and you just can't deal with too many things at once, especially me. Yes?
In my own defense,
No, I wasn't.
I was at the airport, and it was a 11:15 or 11:30 flight p.m., and I sat down at the gate with all the other people, and it was a long day, and I fell asleep. And this was in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which is a small airport, and it was at the very end of the terminal. So the gate at the end of the terminal was like, we were the only ones there. So when I woke up, I was the only one there. I couldn't believe that they wouldn't just nudge me or wake me up. But I had a beard. I was kind of, hippie. And I don't know if I had my bandana yet, but I had long hair and a beard. And so people say, is there anything you regret, about the case? Well, there's lots of things I regret. I think to regret is human, but I think back, well, actually everything worked out fine. We won the case 7-2, so why should I be regretting anything? Maybe if these justices would have looked out and seen the hippie that they were, writing in favor of.
Good thing you weren't there.
Maybe. I mean, who's to say?
Good thing, yeah, that's right.
Anyway.
If you could, obviously you were still in school while the case was going on, and I'm just wondering what the reaction or support was from faculty and or the student body.
I was at the University of Iowa by the time the case happened. I was still in high school for the district court and for the appellate court. The reaction was a lot less than you might imagine. Basically, I don't know how many of the kids would have been even aware of what was going on, but maybe 20% or something like that. There was some commentary, some negative commentary, and some supportive from my friends, and also from the teachers. I had a couple of teachers that were very supportive of me. One of them was a social studies teacher, and he always had me, for the rest of the experience, the 3 years that I was in that school, he always had me come and talk to his classes about the war in Vietnam. So for me, it was really a mixed thing. I never really had any severely negative consequences come at me because of the case.
Mostly the teachers for me just ignored the whole thing. And which was really, it struck me as being kind of strange, especially on the day that we won the case. I was thinking recently that, that day when I went to social studies class, it was in the newspaper on the front page, about this case. I was thinking, it's funny that the teacher, didn't say something like, hey, everybody, something kind of interesting happened with Mary Beth yesterday, but there was not a word about it. So that was funny. But there was a case that was working its way through the courts at the same time as ours. And mostly people in Des Moines did pretty much, we got some hate mail and things like that, and some support mail also. But there was a case in Mississippi. In 1964, Freedom Summer happened in Mississippi, when 700 college students went from all over the United States to help register African American voters. And 3 students were killed as soon as they got there, Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman. So our parents heard about that and went to Mississippi that summer. It was the summer before we wore the armband, a year before. And when that happened, some students, high school students in Mississippi, wore buttons to school that said, "One man, one vote." And all of this led up to the passing of the Voting Rights Act in 1964. But when they wore those buttons to school, it was at a black school, they were black students, and they were suspended from school for wearing those buttons. A year before we did, 1964. So that case started working its way through the courts. It was called Burnside. And it's where the substantial disruption part of our ruling in the Tinker case comes from. Because when we lost at the district level in Iowa, and of course, I thought, of course we're gonna lose because no big important judge is gonna say kids have rights to, break the rules. So we lost. So it was appealed to the appeals court. We lost at the appeals court. While we lost, a couple of weeks before, I think it was a couple of weeks, the Burnside case won in Mississippi. The appeals court in Mississippi, the Fifth Circuit, ruled that yes, actually these students did have a right to wear their buttons to school to protest the murder of Cheney because they hadn't substantially disrupted school. And so around the same time we lost, they won. It was a perfect setup for an appeal to the Supreme Court. We knew nothing of this. We didn't realize that all of this was going on, but we found out later. So yeah, as far as teachers and students' reactions, life went on pretty much for us. We went to depositions, occasional things, but I kept going roller skating, kept going to slumber parties, The worst thing was the war kept going on. And the escalation of the war, and also the civil rights movement. You had all of these things, the Watts riots, Martin Luther King, Selma, everything was escalating all around us. As I said, it was mighty times, a lot like now.
I think only a few of us in the room were around for the war, but it was quite a deal every night on television to see the video coming in from Vietnam, and then every night there was a body count. They were like keeping score. How many U.S. soldiers had died, how many Viet Cong had died, and it was really a horrific thing. And the napalm, and especially on the thatched roof huts of peasants, it was horrific. And it was the ruling feeling of the time for us. And the court case was somewhat less. It sounds a little strange, but it really was. Even when we won and the decision was issued, it was like, okay, great, we won, but the war is still going on, and it was really like that. Back to that point that here we're talking about the First Amendment, but back then we were talking about the war.
Yeah, that's true. When we wore the armbands, about 1,000 U.S. soldiers had been killed in Vietnam. Eventually there would be about 58,000 killed and 2 to 3 million Vietnamese. And right after we won the case in 1969, right after that was when Roger went to Vietnam, and as so many young people were doing all over the country, people in our neighborhood and so many others. So it was hard for us to feel real happy about the ruling, considering the war.
So I'm curious about a technical aspect of the case. I've taught this for 30 years, and Byron White's question during the oral argument about the point of what you were trying to accomplish has always nagged at me. I wondered if it nagged at him because when he got to Kathy's case, he wrote the majority going the other way. But he drew this distinction between words and actions. And he sort of was suggesting that you wanted people to be thinking about the war when they should be thinking about math. And I often have this conversation with my students about the fact that there really isn't pure free speech in the classroom. Because if a student gets up and starts asking about the quadratic equation while I'm talking about the First Amendment, I'm going to tell them to sit down and shut up. And I think that's entirely within my right to do it because the purpose of that class is to be focused on the First Amendment. So I'm curious whether you had any awareness of that or whether you have a thought about the distinction that he ended up concurring in your case, but he seemed to draw this line that I've always struggled to fully understand. So I was just curious what your impression was about that.
Well, there's a long tradition of people wearing black armbands to mourn for the dead. And it's a way of saying that, yes, I'm at work today, or I'm going about my chores, or I'm at school, but I'm also very sad today. And it's where the idea of wearing your feelings on your sleeve comes from. And so there should be a way to go about your math class or your science class or whatever it is, and also to help people be aware that, you know what, I'm also very sad today besides being in class. So I think it's probably good for us as a pediatric nurse and a nurse, I work with teenagers, and I think it's very important to encourage young people to be able to express their feelings and not to, always compartmentalize them. But yes, the purpose of it was to express our feelings, and of course, we interact as humans with others. So we wanted to interact with those around us, and we wanted people to see that, yes, we are sad about the war. And we were trying to really, help there be a truce. We had the idea that, well, if the truce happens by January, or if it happens, and actually there was a truce as a result, but we wanted to, cause some action. Yes, that's true.
The armbands were not a discussion. We weren't saying anything. We weren't standing up in class and saying anything about it. There was nothing to them except the idea that we were opposed to the war. So whether a student can be aware of the war and study math at the same time, and it's an academic question. But in our math class, for example, it was not at all unusual, it was normal for our teacher to go off on whatever topic he wanted to talk about. We learned about the shooting range that used to be over at the swimming pool and how they mined it for lead one day, and on and on and on. And we enjoyed his talks because we learned a lot besides math, but I think that is kind of an academic, theoretically pure kind of student, both, study math and be aware of other things at the same time. I don't know. I don't see it as a major stumbling block for freedom of speech.
Other questions, comments? Yes?
You're begging for a follow-up there by watering your use of the armband down to the point where it's merely a non-disruptive, it seems as though you have to say, I'm wearing it, but it's not having any impact, so it's okay. But I'm wearing it to have an impact, and I've always struggled with how you come around with that.
The court and I think many educators' opinions is that you have a right to try to have an impact in your school, and we want to encourage that. That's what civics is all about: have an impact on your community, an impact on your world. That's what the C3. We want to have an impact. But you do not have a right as a student to substantially disrupt school, and remember the substantial part too. Because it's got to be substantial.
the time and place for a speech or about opposition to the war is, not in the classroom unless it's appropriate and the teacher sees that as part of the curriculum. But when we did this in 1965, the major accomplishment was just to present people with the idea that not everyone supported the war, because the impression was given by the media and the administration that everyone did and should support the war. So it was like we were just kind of breaking into that shell with an awareness of the war. So we didn't feel repressed from not being able to speak. We were happy. We would have been happy just to have been able to wear our armbands. We also had a petition, but we weren't having kids sign it in class. We were having kids sign it between classes.
Well, I was barely getting any kids to sign it at all, and the ones that I did get erased their names later. But regardless, but also don't forget viewpoint discrimination. This is where our very brilliant, wonderful young lawyer, Dan Johnston, our ACLU lawyer, he figured out that the principals really didn't have a problem with student expression. They just wanted it to be something that they agreed with. They didn't have a problem if students wanted to wear, iron crosses, representative of Germany, fine. Armbands saying, we mourn the death of school spirit, fine. Buttons for political candidates is one or the, it was okay, but they just didn't want to hear about the war that Christmas.
And maybe not so much what they themselves didn't want to hear, but that I have a feeling that they were afraid of what the community would think of them if they allowed their students to.
Yeah, that's true. It may not have been them personally, but they felt like, this is too controversial.
That was exactly my question, because you had said earlier about the death of school spirit. And my question was there any other protests or any other acts in your school where people did try to stand up or speak and voice their opinion? And how was that dealt with? Or was it the armband for the death of school spirit and then you and nothing in between to show any?
Yeah, I think there's pretty much a culture of being quiet and going along like there is now a lot of times, with adults too, right?
Well, I just wanted to piggyback off of that. I mean, I just heard you mention the petition. Did I hear right that that was going around at the same time?
Yeah, we had a petition, I forget what it said exactly.
Wouldn't that, well, in my mind, I mean, that could be more disruptive than the armband. So was that taken up by the court, and was there some sort of precedent indirectly maybe set as a result of this?
It sort of got,
Yeah, it wasn't really.
it sort of was not taken up by the, as far as I know. Maybe you know. I'm not aware of any mention of it. It was sort of not as well known, basically, as the armbands, and Mary Beth said some of the people signed it and then he erased their names.
Here's mine. It's got my signature on it.
What does it read?
When I signed it,
Read
it says, "We, the undersigned pupils of the Des Moines school system, feel that to wear something symbolic of our beliefs, such as armbands, religious symbols, such as crucifixes, or crosses about the neck, or pins of a reasonable size," not like the bong hits for Jesus band records, "such as those of political or fraternal origin, it's our right of free expression. We believe it is not disruptive to the educational atmosphere of the school system and that it is not an infringement of the basic rights of other students." So I got my signature and I've got Christine and Marcia, but they sort of crossed theirs off later, but regardless.
This was a
I
kind of
tried.
last-minute consideration after we knew that they had banned the armband
Yeah.
wearing. It was sort of
Yeah,
the
2
last-
days later after they banned.
Well, I just wanted to ask, because I find it amazing that you've saved.
No, our mother saved these. She's the one. See, but as soon as I realized they were around, I did save them. Yeah.
Well, because it just seems to indicate, because you had said earlier, that you went on, with just being a teenager and experiencing what all teenagers do. But I think back to my youth, and I wonder if somehow you knew or your parents knew that this was going to be a much bigger issue than maybe you had thought on that day when you decided
Yeah,
to wear
I think
your
some
armband.
people definitely realized that it was a bigger issue. The ACLU realized, and our mother. Well, you have to know our mother too. She's kind of a saver. She saves things, but she definitely realized that this was going to be a big issue, and that it was going to be a freedom of speech rights issue besides a peace issue.
Some people were definitely more aware of the long-term implications of this than we were. William Kunstler, who was a radical lawyer who defended the Chicago 7 and the Chicago 8 over the 68 convention protests, we got a phone call from him offering to be our lawyer. And our parents asked around, who is this guy? And people said, no, he's too radical, you don't want him. And so anyway, that's
Go with the ACLU, that won't cause any waves at all. Yeah, go with them, they're nice, little conservative group. Yeah.
But our mother definitely, she got it from her father, and I got it from her. So she took notes every meeting she attended, and she attended many. She took notes, and all those notes are still there. She had some sense of you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, and that keeping track of reality and what really happened was somehow important, that the deity or whatever would be calculating justice from all of this.
Remember, there weren't any major cases about students' rights before, except for the Barnett case. I mean, students' rights, the Brown decision, of course, has to do with a different kind of students' rights. But there was the Barnett decision in, that was the funniest thing for all of you civics people. You might know that there was a case before the Barnett decision, the flag salute case, the Gobitis decision, where the Supreme Court ruled that, yes, it is okay to discriminate against Jehovah's Witnesses. And so then there was sort of a bloodbath after that, and 2 years later, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and that they did not have to salute the flag. So anyway, one day I was speaking to some middle school kids who had a volunteer law professor come in once a week and talk to them about civics and law and everything. So this little boy, Brandon, he's like in 5th grade or something, and it's time for questions and answers, and he goes, did you know the Gobitis children? I was like, where did you get this? I couldn't believe this. I mean, law students don't know about the Gobitis. It was really great. It shows the power of spending a little time with 5th graders.
I wanted to say with regard to, were there other protests? It's like, no. There were no other protests.
Yeah, about 85% of the population was in favor of the war, we've seen surveys recently.
The protest theoretically against the death of school spirit was not a protest. It was more like a cheering squad project.
Pep rally.
And in school, we were just not like that. We couldn't conceive of a protest, really. I don't think there was any.
Walkout against school testing? I don't think so.
Yeah, so this was.
It is happening now. So maybe we should bring it up to the current days more. Now, what students are using this case for, and others, well, you're going to get into that too some, I'm sure, at lunch, but social media, yes?
I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but I
Go ahead, you can surprise.
Verve and spirit than you, and you too, but do you endorse disruption in a level like that?
Do I endorse disruption?
Like, not for the problems it can cause, but for the sense of like civic engagement that you were talking about earlier.
Well, it all depends. I mean, you have principals now that are not suspending their students for walking out of school. Lansing, Michigan. I think it was Lansing, the students walked out to protest No Child Left Behind and standardized testing. The principal didn't suspend the students. I mean, 100 principals on Long Island alone signed a petition against evaluations based on standardized testing. So you have, sometimes it's just, I don't, encourage students to walk out of school and get suspended. I tell students that we didn't know about this concept, but there is a concept that our country, is based on that goes way, way back. It's called civil disobedience. And we're here in Boston, like a block or two away from some of it started. But if there's something that you don't agree with, and you want to take a stand, and it's got to be nonviolent, and you're willing to take the consequences if it's against the rules or it's against the law. Like I say, if you're a slave and you ran away, were you breaking the law? Were you disrupting the plantation? But should you? So, there are times when you have to be prepared. What about the Birmingham children? They were arrested and put in 2,000 of them in outdoor prisons, and now there's a monument to them in Birmingham and a whole park devoted to them. And, who's the hero there? Is it Bull Connor, who arrested them for breaking the law, or is it the children who broke? So it's complicated, but I'm glad you talked about that, because it's probably the hardest thing to talk to kids about our whole case is, okay, wait, there was a rule and you broke it. Now, how's that go? Because we're taught to follow the rules, right? So in a way, I guess I'm trying to, start introducing this idea to students that sometimes you do need to challenge the status quo and the authority, and sometimes you may have to take a risk, and sometimes you may have to pay a price for that also. But it is the most, I'd say, complex and hard thing to talk about with students.
There's a tendency when we're talking about the First Amendment or law or political law to try to seek a grand unified theory where everything has a place within the system. And my view is that the political realm is not the whole of our civilization or of our culture. And that I don't think that you can find a place in the political realm, that orientation system, to say that, yes, we will allow disruption in these certain cases. I don't think it's going to happen. But in the broader culture, when people are strategizing to try to bring their value to the fore of the culture, of the whole society, that there are places where you will say, yes, we'll violate this law in order to achieve this end. And so I can imagine cases where you would want to disrupt and break the law. And in the nonviolent theory, civil disobedience and the Martin Luther King Gandhian point of view, you do it nonviolently and you accept the consequences. So you're not violating the concept of law itself, which I think a lot of people who disagree with the law still believe in law itself. And so we don't want to insult the concept of law, but we want to achieve some other end. And I think that like with the freeway blockages and so on, are the modern example of real disruption. And I back in the day, they'd say, when I was involved in the civil rights movement directly, there was a song that says, nobody likes things the way they are, but you go too fast and you go too far. There's always an argument against disruption. Say, these are just people trying to get to work. You're turning them against your cause, and so on. But for some reason, somebody thought, well, we need to do this. We need to bring this to the fore of the consciousness. And I don't feel that I can judge that one way or the other. But and I didn't want to tangle into that particular controversy. But anyway, the idea that the legal political law is one component of society, but not the only component.
And also then, how do you teach this? And should you teach it? Maybe some of you heard about Jefferson County, Colorado, where there was a new school board, I think last year, just within the last year or so. And they decided, social studies should be a lot more patriotic. And we shouldn't talk about all these dissenters and these troublemakers and things like that. We should kind of clean up social studies history and, government. So the kids had these huge walkouts, and you could see them online with these posters saying, "We want the truth, teach us the truth." And they started hashtag Jeffco history to make fun of this new history that was going to be taught. They had pictures of the Birmingham children getting shot by the water hoses. And the caption was, "Kind firemen put out children on fire." And they they just, had this whole movement to take back their history and say, no, we want to learn about dissenters. We want to learn about all of our history. And I was just in Colorado talking to the teachers union conference there, and some of the Jeffco teachers were there. It was really interesting. But I admire what they did. And they elected a whole new school board now. And the kids were very involved in that.
So I have a question. You've kind of mentioned several cases of kids coming out and dissenting and disrupting. And I'm curious if there's been a moment in your life where you've thought, wow, I empowered them to do that, or something that you've been impressed that kids have done because of your case.
Well, I don't think either of us, feel like it was us specifically, first of all. I mean, first of all, Chris Eckhart was also a plaintiff in our case, a wonderful, beautiful soul who died a few years ago. But, I mean, what we did was a group effort that was involving many other people. And as you can see, our parents and our lawyer, the ACLU, who has a 100-year history of not always being popular for standing up for people like us, because we were very unpopular with some people at the time. I mean, we were called communists, and we had red paint thrown at our house, and we got, mail like this, our hate mail. And my mom would always say, we're not communists, we're Methodists. But, so I don't feel like it was just, I can never say that it was us. But I did realize through the years, finally, after talking to a lot of people like all of you and school administrators and lawyers and things like that, that the case did make a difference. It changed the climate in schools. Before then, it was up to the principal and the school board to decide what was and what wasn't expressed in school. And that climate has changed. But some principals and administrators still follow that old model. And, there's just a lot still going on today.
To the matter of, yes, I feel proud, and I think Mary Beth also feels proud to be associated with the case, but not that we were the causal agent. I was approached by a writer a long time ago who wanted to write a screenplay about it, but he said, I only want to focus on one of you, because 3 makes it too complicated for the narrative. And I thought about that at the time, and I decided I didn't want to be a part of that. And because it wasn't just the 3 of us, it was the whole Peace community, and it wasn't even just the Iowa thing. We were a part of a big thing. And our parents, one day I woke up, and it was the clarity of insight was very distinct, and I realized the role that our parents, not just our parents, but Chris's.
That does happen, doesn't it? Yeah.
Every once in a while. Our parents and Chris's parents were very committed, and they were lifelong activists, but it wasn't just. We were honored to have the case named after us, but we weren't the cause of it, and so anyway. But it's wonderful to be associated with that, with the whole thing.
Anything that helps students have a voice, I'm all for it, and I'm very happy that I could spend my life helping that to happen. And it's a great life, and all of you do as well. So here's to people, adults, who are allies of youth, to have a voice in our democracy. Wrap it up yet? Other comments, questions? Yeah.
Can you
Yeah,
walk
Mike.
us through the oral arguments that were made?
The oral arguments, our lawyer, a lot of it had to do with that there was no disruption and that there was viewpoint discrimination, that the school had allowed other viewpoints. I think that was, and also you can hear the oral arguments because a wonderful man named Peter Irons succeeded in getting all of these a lot of important cases, the arguments to be available. So they're on audio and you can look them up. So you can hear the oral arguments in our case. And the school boards, a lot of the school board I think had to do with, well, their parents, were really the ones behind this and it's going to disrupt school, and school authorities need to have some say in order to maintain the way the school's run.
Yeah, the lawyer for the school board, you can hear it, and it's, to me, he was sort of had the character of a World War II sergeant, sort of. He had a gravelly voice, and he seemed to just assume that the court would agree with him. And our lawyer was a young, idealistic lawyer arguing that this is purely freedom of speech. How can you see it otherwise? Anyway, I can't walk you through the oral arguments, but those were the impressions I got the last time I heard.
I can tell you one thing that Thurgood Marshall did that really helped our case, and I'm a huge fan. He's one of my heroes. I have a pin that I wear of Thurgood Marshall, which his wife Sissy gave because she knows I go out and speak to students and teachers a lot, and she wants you to know that the spirit of Thurgood Marshall is here with you. And so Thurgood Marshall, in the arguments, the school board lawyer said, well, all these students were wearing these armbands. So Thurgood Marshall said, now how many students were wearing? Well, five were suspended. So. But the lawyer for the school board, but more than that, wore the armbands. Yes, 5 were suspended, but more than that, wore the armbands. So Thurgood Marshall said, well, how many actually wore the armbands? Well, 7. And so Thurgood Marshall said, okay, you're telling me that 7 students out of a school district of 18,000 disrupted your school district? And it really helped us, I think, when he said that. Kind of pointed out how much we really had not disrupted the school. We were lucky that we had Thurgood Marshall and William Brennan and Abe Fortas and the lawyers, the justices who believed in the First Amendment and supported us. Later on, Clarence Thomas came out in the Bong Hits for Jesus case in his ruling, his part of it, saying that the Tinker ruling should be overturned. And he cited this crazy case of Peter Lander, which you bring out in your wonderful book, We the Students, David Hudson, about how, he cites Peter Lander, this case in the 1700s where a boy was whipped with rawhide for calling out to his teacher after school. It was out of school speech, I guess, the very first instance. 1700s.
The good old days.
And back in the good old days when you could whip children with rawhide.
We had the opportunity to attend one of the evening lectures that are held at the Supreme Court building. Lectures can be held there if they have a justice that will sponsor them. And this lecture was about the plaintiffs in Tinker v. Des Moines, so it was about us. And Mary Beth found out about it, and we got ourselves an invitation, and so I was sitting. Actually, my son Fisher was sitting right next to Justice Alito, and I was right next to him. So after the lecture, which presented pretty much the material you've heard already. We got up and introduced ourselves, and so I was speaking with Justice Alito, and I said, during his nomination hearing, he had been asked a question about our case, and he said, well, I consider it to be stare decisis, already decided. And I said, I heard that during your nomination hearings, and what are your feelings and thoughts about that? And he said, no, I support your case. It is the standard, and I hope it continues to be the standard. And so that was a really heartwarming thing to hear. And the lecture that night was presented by Professor Shackelford from Texas, who is a lawyer who represents fundamentalist Christian interests.
The Liberty Institute.
And so politically, we were on the other side of, part of a spectrum somewhere. And, but there they are supporting our case because the principle of First Amendment rights is not viewpoint specific. And it protects the Christian fundamentalists right to use the classroom after school, just like the Boy Scouts might or any other organization. So there's a lot of support for our case from around the spectrum, if you accept Justice Thomas, who is a sworn enemy to our case.
I don't mean to essentialize things, but I often do that. One of the things for me that this whole case seems to hinge on is impinging on others' rights. And I just kind of like to bring this up to present day with the way that we talk now about religious liberty and religious freedom and gun rights and all of these different rights that people feel that they have, and whose morality is it that we, who decides?
There's so many, it's a gray area. The issue of free speech, the issue has always been, where is the limit? And it's a gray area. And our case has been cited something like 9,000 times the last time we checked, and so many current cases cited also. But because there's a gray area. What is impinging and what does that mean? And so that's why I always tell the students, that's why you should weigh in on all this. Because students should know about all of this and have an opinion and think about it and weigh in on it. What do you think? As much as a lot of adults, there's disagreement among the Supreme Court justices. It's not like there's some book you can go to turn to find the answer to these questions about the First Amendment. All of us get to help decide about it. And, they always tried to act like, with, oh, you're kids, you don't know anything about Vietnam, you don't know the whole history, you don't know about the French, you don't know about their War of Independence, you don't know about the U.S. and all, but neither did most Americans. And it's just like now, try to say kids don't know this or that, but you have to remember that a lot of American adults don't either. So they have as much right, I think, to weigh in and know, and should know about these things as anyone else.
I don't feel that I understand your question exactly. Are you saying that there are all of this profusion of people claiming rights for
various... And it gets confusing because who's impinging on who? I decide that I'm a court registrar in a place that I don't want to give a marriage license to someone because I don't agree with their religious views. Is that my religious liberty, or am I impinging on their right to get married because the Supreme Court has said that they have that right?
Yeah, is it? I mean, students, I think, should, learn about it, talk about it, find people who are writing about it, legal experts who say this or that on both sides, and try to figure it out. Like all of us are trying to do.
Question, I'm sorry.
No. One of the vice presidential candidates, Pence, said that he's a Christian, something.
A basic person.
A
basic American.
And an American in that order. And so people have a feeling of right and duty that don't necessarily integrate into a complete and whole system. It's like I can understand somebody who feels that their responsibility to the deity, if any, is the ultimate responsibility that you have. And if a political system conflicts with that, you go with the higher authority. I mean, I can understand that, but you can't work that into a system of political law. But I think that what we're seeing is that the assertion of right is a way, it's a wedge that you get to enter your conversation then. You say, I have a right to this, so why? And then you get a conversation going. But like on gun rights, it's not over. That conversation is going on right now. So.
Well, controversy in the classroom.
Did either of you participate in any anti-war demonstrations after this?
Yeah, just a few years ago. I mean, it's still going on now. We were both pretty active against the invasion of Iraq, for example. I spoke out against the bombing of Syria and increased involvement in Syria. I don't believe that violence is the way to solve problems, and I think we should do what we tell the kids to do. Use your words. And so that's kind of, I think, what we were trying to do with our armbands. Tell the adults, why don't you use your words? And not just jump to war, but try to negotiate. We don't try to negotiate enough, I think, before we get into military situations, and that's a whole other subject about, how we could follow the money, and as a nurse and teachers, I'm sure you have feelings about how our budgets are spent. They're not always for kids. Kids don't get a top priority. Kids get the lowest priority. And that's why this is a children's rights issue. Who's more likely to live in poverty in our country? Children and teenagers. They're not really getting a fair deal. Their budget, all over the country as I travel around, and John and I travel, the budgets are being cut for schools, band program being cut. You know how it is. So that's why it's a children's rights issue also.
I did participate in basically all of the major ones that happened at Washington. And since then, for me, the part of the question is, when is a demonstration effective or not? But I consider myself to be an anti-war activist, and my political philosophy is organized in such a way that it turns out that war is always the wrong thing to do, and that the drivers of conflict are not necessarily who is being presented as your enemy. And it's from my point of view, it's a coherent, integrated philosophy, and I'm always going to be against war. So I use whatever seems to be effective at the moment to promote that value. And people say, well, champion of liberty, or courage of your conviction, and so on. If I really had the courage of my convictions all the time, I'd be wearing a black armband all the time, because just read the newspaper and you can see, there's plenty to mourn every day.
We have some for you all later that we're going to have. In case you have something you want to speak up about, you can wear your black armband. But I'm not a complete pacifist myself personally also. I believe sometimes there could be justifiable war. I don't know. But this is, more controversy.
I was wondering if you felt that being from Des Moines and not really being of the community of Des Moines, and you mentioned your father last night sort of being outside of the mainstream norms of Iowa communities. So I was wondering if you felt maybe, had you grown up somewhere else, and if you had been more integrated into the broader... do you think that your experience would have been the same? Do you think it was part of its place and the time? Was it just time, or do you think the place of Des Moines mattered?
Yeah, we were so mainstream, though. We were part of the mainstream.
It's an actually excellent question. And the answer is, in a different place, it would have been different, for sure. That first trip I ever took to Washington, and to be surrounded by all of those people that opposed the war, they weren't all pacifists at all. We picked up a hitchhiker that day, one of the protesters, and he had on a chainmail glove that a meat cutter would wear, and that was his solution for facing the police. I mean, I'd never encountered a Trotskyite or the hard left. I'd never seen it in Des Moines, Iowa. I think it was there, but it may have been a little below the radar. But yes, the tone of Des Moines, Iowa was a part of the whole thing. Des Moines is not a big city. It was 250,000 people when we were there, a small city. And we were politically, my parents were out of the mainstream, but socially, our father was a minister. He was a generally well-liked minister. Our mother was an activist, not so well-liked. Maybe she was very vociferous and had a real radical edge to her. But our father was always interested in relating to people. I saw, actually, looking through a sermon that he had written for a small community in in Iowa, a farming community that he had traveled to give a sermon, where he had revised his sermon in order to avoid confrontational thing. Iowa nice, you know, it's like, that really was part of what was going on.
I appreciate what you said about it. You would always have an armband on, courage of convictions. Have there ever been a time where you chose not to take, either do an explicit, overt, you know, demonstration of your feelings because you thought it would better help the end goal?
Well, yeah, so many. I mean, you have to weigh it out. That's why I tell the students, you know, they're like, well, we can't wear caps, and I think that's terrible. I said, okay, let's say you want caps to be your thing, you know? You have two choices. You can do nothing, or you can do something about it, you know? And maybe you do nothing sometimes because you have to study for that, you know, class you're working on, or you have to go to your block. Sometimes you do nothing about things, and sometimes...
You know, the feet of clay kind of issue, it's, you know, it's like, I feel completely human in that sense. I can tell you a story I don't tell very often, but at the University of Iowa, with a group of people protesting the war, trying to determine what to do, and the idea was we would stay at school for the Christmas break that year. We wouldn't return to our families. We'd be telling our families, look, if you want us to be home for Christmas, get rid of the war. And so that was our, we had a...
But they were so glad that you were gone for Christmas.
There was
that they did really, no, just kidding.
Okay, so okay, this was the plan. And so I was talking to my dad on the phone about it, and he says, no, don't do that. This is when you need to be at home talking to parents. I want you home for Christmas, you know. And so I went home, you know. I kind of left my cohort, you know, to, you know. So it's like, yeah, I think, you know, I'm completely human. I think Mary Beth, you know, would agree when she took off her armband at that crucial moment. It's like, we experience anxiety, fear, and everything, and it does affect us.
Yeah, I think that's one powerful, well, I decided I can spin that actually, you know, because I tell kids, and it's not just spinning, but, you know, that even a shy girl who's scared, you know, can make a difference. And that's really what it's all about, in a way. I have this letter, where is it? It's around here somewhere, from this 5th grader. And she says, I try to stand up for myself too, but whenever I do, my legs start shaking and my arms start shaking, and I'm trying to get better, and I'm trying. And really, that's kind of my message: is you can try to, you know, be stronger. Look how scared and shy I was.
That's what we had. It's not like we came in as heroic actors. We had an impulse, and we had enough support that we didn't collapse.
Yeah, it helps to have at least one person supporting, like a teacher supporting. And that's why we're out in the schools, because we want to be that person to show the kid and be an example. You too could stand up about something, you know. So maybe it's hats this week. Maybe, you know, it's Black Lives Matter, whatever it is. Maybe it's the environment. And we have so many examples that we collect as we travel around about kids who are standing up and speaking up about things. And I have my little coloring books. We've made this coloring book of true stories of the First Amendment of children, teenagers also, standing up about something or other. 2nd graders who are protesting the circus because it's not fair to animals. And, you know, from the whole range, kids wearing yarmulkes to school and hijabs, and some kids being atheists. And so just having examples, it makes a difference. We had examples.
Mary Beth gets out a lot and talks to a lot of groups, and I don't so much, but I'd be happy to. And I want to let you all know, because you're teachers, I do Skype with classes, and please, if it ever seems that it would be useful to do Skype, I'm sure either of us would be happy to do that.
Definitely.
All right. Yes.
Oh, I just had a question about, so much of what you're saying, John specifically, seems to be based on like the sincerely held belief that like you believe so strongly in your right of conscience and expressing that. And I think so much of where speech gets watered down for students is when adults don't take it seriously and don't believe that there's a sincerely held belief, especially in the dissent of this case. Like, it's so belittling. And so I wonder what advice you would have for teachers and helping students hone to like what is their sincerely held belief and what they are willing to accept the punishment for and why. And like, so what advice you have for students and what advice you would have
That's
for
why
teachers?
I ask the students, what is an issue that you really care about? And last week when I was at a school in Washington, D.C., it was the school lunches. So then we talk about, okay, so how could you use your 5 First Amendment rights? And we go over what the First Amendment rights are. How could you use those to make a difference? And I give them some examples of students that have gotten better lunches by taking some action, and then they talk about, well, maybe we could have a petition. Well, at one school, they said, yeah, well, we had a petition, but they took up our petition. So I was like, well, maybe you have to have a petition about the petition. I don't know. I mean, just keep on going, don't give up, keep trying. We talk about what they could, we have to get to what is their issue, what is something they really care about, and not belittle it, if it's yoga pants, I don't care what it is. Just go with it. If that's what you really care about and you want to stand up and speak up about it,
I think that students are young people are naturally sort of idealistic because they don't have a lot of experience and they're still trying to figure out the world, and they do it by general principles. With regard to the question of how to help a student work it out, I think thinking ahead about what you're doing, asking questions like, are there ways that I am going to offend somebody if I say this? And if so, are there ways that I can say it without offending them? If I can, that's the way to say it. But if I can't, if they're going to be offended, still don't let that keep me from saying something that's important to say. That's my view on that. But I will just say, my son Fisher here, in their school cafeteria, not all of the cafeteria workers wear hairnets when they're making food. So the kids have been discovering hairs in their food. Yeah. So they created a petition. But the petition was taken by the teacher, and they were told that they couldn't do that. So in administrations, there's just this whole spectrum of teachers' points of view and administrators' points of view. And some teachers and administrators, their most important thing is to help the kids understand what their rights are, how to operate in a democratic society. Some teachers and administrators, their most important thing is, how do I maintain order? How do I keep a lid on this? And so being among the population of teachers and administrators that is helping us to learn how to operate this complex democracy. And the educational experience, as Fortas pointed out in his decision, in his opinion, in our case, that the students, of all places that you want students to be experiencing democratic principles, it's in school. You want the students in school to be learning these principles because that's how our society operates. So to suppress rights arbitrarily in a school is sending exactly the wrong message.
And also, there are organizations that really help to guide you in this effort to get students involved. And one of them is the Center for Civic Education, their Project Citizen thing, which is just wonderful. It's helping students identify a problem in their community and then take action at the policy level, which is why I really like the program a lot. But there are other ones also, but I think that's one of the best because it really has to do with action and changing policies in your community about something that really is affecting your life right now. Maybe we should just wind it up, but I'll just say I just want to tell you a part of a speech that was given recently at the United Nations by some students from the United States who are trying to get the United States to sign on to the Declaration on the Rights of Children. There's only 2 countries that have not signed on to it. I think Sudan is the other one. So they're trying to get the United States to sign on to this Declaration for the Rights of Children. So they made this speech, and in their speech they said, "We are not the problems, we are the solution." And yes, you say we are the future, but we are also the present. So thank you all for being in our present today. You've really enriched our lives, and it's wonderful to be with all of you. Thank you so much.